All right, guys, today's video is competition with neighbors, food plots. I'm bringing back this series and breaking these down into more detailed segments. And food plots seem to be the most common competitive tool that we, as hunters ourselves, can use against other neighbors. Now, competition is great with neighbors, but don't let it become a wedge between you and your neighbor. I think there comes a point where the two of you or three of you, ever how many there are, need to work together and really achieve the ultimate goal. If you can do that, I understand not everybody gets along and you don't want to talk to people, but eventually at some point, if you can find a way to agree to something, that'll help both of you. Now, let's get into these different situations just in food plots. There are many ways to tackle competition here. For one, knowledge is power for your benefit. If you know what your neighbor's routine is as far as how he does his food plotting system, you can actually outdo him and do a better plot than he can. Now, what does your neighbor plant? How good is his soil? How often are the deer on his place versus my place? These are kind of questions that you might want to ask yourself to see where you can improve your food plot performance. So let's go ahead and start with the bad soil. If you have bad soil, most of the time your neighbor probably will, to a good portion, to a good extent of what you have, unless he is like he's into making sure his soil's really good and producing as much tonnage as he can. But there's still ways to override that, and I'll get in that to a minute, or I'll get involved in that here in just a minute. What we're looking for here is we need to improve the soil in order to compete in the first place. So that is step one for anybody that has issues with soil quality. Now, that is involving soil test, of course, which is a recent video I just did. And we're going to work on trying to figure out where the last fine tuning can be in this soil. And we'll just make it as best as possible. So what happens here when bad soil gets involved? The taste of your plants, and I don't care what species you put out here, will taste worse, bitter, kind of sour. Even if it's soybean, you can still lose in competition because your soil is either acidic or low in some form of nutrients, or multiple nutrients. You may only have one or two things that come back as good. You have work to do if you want to compete. That is what I've been doing here for a long time now, is fine-tuning my system to be a better competitor. I am out smarting my current neighbors right now because they're not into soil health. Now, the neighbor on the hill, I think he is starting to come around to that a little bit, but I am already well ahead of him as far as quality that my soil is making now. So by doing trace minerals, your P and K levels, by getting them to at least adequate, you can win a lot more competition battles with deer on your property. Now, what if you have a neighbor or multiple neighbors that have greenery like you do, but it's not what you plant? Let's say they put out clover for the year, or some sort of clover chicory mix, something that's not too advanced, but it's just basically a fairly large plot, or even a small plot if you're having to compete with smaller sizes. Doesn't matter. You can outfox him by planting variety. So if your soil is in really good shape and you've worked hard at it, and his soil is just as good as yours, you have the better playing field when you plant variety. Deer will get tired of eating the same thing over and over until basically they can find somebody else that's got something else. So if everybody in your neighborhood plants clover, they're going to eat it because it's forced upon them. But the second somebody puts variety out and there's something else there besides clover or even chicory, then the deer will flock to that plot and often stay in there longer than the neighbors with just monoculture or single species food plots. So you can gain a competitive advantage by going the multiple species route. Now, another thing that you can do, what about, the greenery kind of covers what people typically think of like spring and summer. So if you've juiced your soil up, you plant variety, you still have some other things in your planting arsenal that you can outdo your neighbor with. So let's say that your neighbor plants nothing but corn for the fall and winter setup on his property. You have an outright advantage over him, because if you can offer winter greens and winter grains, whether it's soybean, milo, those are really two good high quality grains. But if you also plant corn, you're competing on an even field with him with corn, but by putting greens in there, you have an advantage, whether you stick to soybean only with greens mixed in, or milo only, greens mixed in. As long as you have that combo of both, you are at a very high competitive advantage over your neighbors. So in really cold shots, deer will want grains. They're not going to really eat greens that are frozen down to the ground when the really rough time of winter kicks in. Because there was times here that it got so cold that this looked like it laid down where it was frozen. It just wouldn't grow. The grains were getting destroyed because that's what the deer were looking for when it got cold. So I'm providing some sort of high quality food on all weather conditions. Even with the multiple snows that we had, which wasn't a whole bunch, I think 5.25 I think was the biggest we had as far as inches of snow, but all this grain was sticking above the snow line, no issue at all. Deer come in, hammered it, and moved on, so they wasn't starving for food. Now, in that transition phase, the greenery has now taken over as the top dog for what deer want. And if you're looking for evidence of better taste, look at this green color. Look at the field. Field is trying to play catch up. It's trying to green up. Here, I've been green since way into February and late January. I got a lot greener in February because I put boron out here, but I was green basically from the day I planted this stuff. It stayed green and was really strong. Matter of fact, the strongest start I've ever seen here in this soil. So I'm competing with solid, high protein, good quality against my neighbors. I had all kinds of trail cam videos right there where deer were constantly in here at night. They were in here in daytime as well, just not as much, which leads me into my next thing. So if both of you or all of your neighbors are doing a highly competitive game here of who gets the most deer, there's still another avenue you can go. So if they plant multiple species, you plant multiple species, you all have great ground and you're still competing, is there another advantage that you can take care of over your neighbors? Well, one is the setup. That is looking at how the land lays out and understanding your surroundings. So doing a little bit of studying, deer want safety. If you can provide a safety net to deer by using a screening wall, you can actually gain another advantage, sorry about that, over your neighbor. So here, this is the first year I took my screen wall out, which it will be coming back this year. It cost me too much browse by not having it. But here we have an open space, wide open. And I'm wearing a white shirt. You can see me all the way from that house. Matter of fact, you could stand on that mountain over there and see this white Humpty Dumpty standing out in the middle of the field here. I'm not hidden. My deer's not hidden. I know they're shorter than I am, but I can see them from the house as plain as day, especially after this field's cut. So screen walls are a very vital tool that you can use as competition with your neighbors. So if like if vehicles right here can come up and down this part of the road and see me, they're going to see your deer. For the most part, they will see your deer. So the only way to do that is to hide your deer is either to let this field grow up where they can't hardly see them, or you plant screen walls or plant high amounts of tonnage. But typically screen walls can grow extremely tall depending on which variety you get. Some can grow as high as 14 feet if they're in excellent soil. So something 14 feet high is twice the height of that pole, or a little higher than that, maybe. So you're looking at something that's got twice that height. I can stand right here, nobody would see me. No one. I am providing safety. And if your neighbors have wide open farmland like this, a lot of times they may not be providing safety to those deer. So you can gain an advantage by hiding deer and making them feel secure in your food plots. So it might be a 60-40 split, 60% your land, 40% their land, but you change the balance of the competition because of a simple screen wall. When I did a test run in here for 3 or 4 years with a screen wall, my deer activity was over twice of what it was this year in the daytime. Over twice. That spells much higher opportunity when I'm up here hunting, or if I'm at the shooting table over there in the tree line of taking a buck. So that way your odds are in your favor just by doing a simple screen wall. Now here's another thing. We can get into deeper detail here. You want to battle with your neighbor, you can make it a tonnage war. If you have small areas and they have way more land than you, your food plots can be planned based on the plant's tonnage produced. So what is some of the top dogs in plant tonnage produced? Deer vetch and cowpeas are literally like neck and neck with each other as far as tonnage produced. So deer vetch can provide over 10,000 pounds per acre. Cowpeas is right there with it, right around 10,000 or a little more per acre. So in that instances where your smaller plots are concerned, you're producing tonnage what big boys can produce. So you can override space by planting high tonnage plants. Soybean is another one if it can grow. I know a lot of people may have trouble with soybean growing because deer just destroy that stuff. And if you have high deer density, a plot like this, it won't survive it. But I've gauged mine based on deer numbers that I estimate. So doing that by planting, there's 3 high tonnage plants right there, you're going to win, or at least draw even more often by planting the tonnage route. You can also add sun hemp in here. It gets really tall. I've had it as tall as 10 or 11 feet in here before. You can add milo mixed in with that, and that's not summer or spring and summer tonnage per se, but you're adding grain to that mix to help bolster your fall and winter when these greens are trying to regain tonnage they lost. So there's other ways around competition. Just making sure these food plots are in the best shape possible. Size can matter to a certain extent. I know we can be landlocked because I did a poll on the community. Well, I need to quit calling it community. It's now called post tab on my channel. And the most votes came in at too small or not enough land was the biggest issue that a lot of people seem to face. And you have to plant, if you want to compete tonnage wise, by picking plants that produce the tonnage you need in order to give yourself a chance. So there's 3 plants right there that can help you gain momentum. So a plot this big, and it's a 1 acre food plot here. This plot produces really what 5 and 6 acre food plots produce. So the amount of tonnage this area creates covers everything you see from the fence down to the creek. That's how much food is crammed into this 1 acre area right here. I make sure I produce high volume. And if I'm not producing high volume, that part of the ground will be fixed in order to compete. So every year I'm doing my system, I'm getting better. And that's another thing. Your food plot system can make or break you in competition. Do you do no-till drilling versus tilling? I've had to modify my till so my ground can get better. I'm not going to sink the tiller down in here 5 or 6 inches deep and just tear the ground up and fluff it up. I actually have a reverse effect in my food plots because of that. If I went to a no-till system, my competition edge just kicked it up another notch. Those plants will grow stronger roots, therefore they will get larger and have more nutrition in them. So this is the name of the game. Do you want to buy bacteria to push your plot further? Do you need to buy worms to push your plot even further? These are all things that you can do in order to compete with your neighbors and win more battles than lose. And yes, hunting pressure can be annoying, but if you're trying to do everything you can, eventually it's going to work in your favor. And that's why I don't give up here. These big bucks that I've grown, that other people have shot, we've had our turn. We shot 140 something inch deer out of here. It's not like I've never succeeded. Now, would I like to get some of the booners I've grown in the past? You better believe it. And because of this here, where I've willingly admitted that my first attempt at this was doing it the wrong way, and going back and studying, I am a much better, good Lord, a much better competitor with my neighbors. And now they are behind the 8 ball and I am ahead. And I am years ahead of them. So when he does, like if the neighbor on the hill decides to fertilize his food plot and he does nothing else to ensure that that soil gets better over time, I will win that battle. I'm out for consistency. When you fertilize, that can be temporary. It could last a month. It might last 8 weeks, maybe 10 weeks. But eventually that fertilizer will get drained out if you're not working on trying to better your soil. All right, guys. So that's the first video in this series. You can do all kinds of things, even plant trees, fruit trees, chestnut trees, something to add an extra attraction to your food plot that neighbors don't have. There's all kinds of angles you can take at this, and if you're willing to work hard at it, and that may involve expanding food plot, so you may have to get bigger. Just whatever you can do to win the advantage. You all have a great day, and hit that like and subscribe button.